Welcome to A State of Mind. We present today a Celtic State of Mind. As you know, I'm Paul John Dykes, and to my right, once again, I have Jim Simonetti, where we are joined with Paul Smith. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here because you've been listening to the podcast from afar.
I have indeed. I've been sitting in the epicentre of the pandemic in Florida. Just finished my 2 weeks quarantine here. And I've been listening to all the podcasts and really enjoy this podcast. Great.
It's a delight to have you on, and over the last few weeks Jim's been giving me some of your feedback on some of the episodes. I'm sure we'll touch on some of them as we go along, Paul. So you were saying earlier there that during the pandemic it's obviously hit a lot of people in different ways, but you start revisiting things that you love and you fell in love with a long time ago. Is that what you've been doing with the Celtic archives?
I think it is. It's. I mean, the amount of quality footage and recordings on the internet at the moment is superb. I mean, I spent an hour and 40 minutes or 2 hours one Saturday listening to Radio Clyde in 1985 when the Hearts game and the St Mirren game, and it was just a joy listening to Ibrox Park and the rest of them all doing their commentary, and it was just fabulous. Just so much enjoyment, bringing back just the build up to that. I can remember watching BBC Scotland the night before when they were going through Edinburgh, and you're seeing all the Hearts supporters, and you know, Davy Hay had a really difficult time, and the team were playing really well. And if you look back and you watch that game, we had a fabulous team.
Yeah,
outstanding. Which shows you how good Hearts must have been. But the expectation was they were just going to roll over Dundee, and I can remember at the time, I think I was my finals coming up, and I didn't get to the game, but I was sitting listening to it on the radio, and just I mean, you saw the highlights again, the quality of the game, and dare I say it, I think it was the third goal. Yeah, you know who.
Started with Danny McGrain. It's a good move for Danny. Paul McStay, Brian McClure. Yes.
But you're right, Paul John and Paul. It started with Danny, and it did finish with Maurice Johnson. But you see, it's very important that we still, no matter, we're a club that no matter what, we don't forget our history. And even if a certain individual was part of that history, he's part of it. We don't put it under the carpet, where maybe you go across to the other side of the city, or should I say Ibrox Stadium, where they may have blocked out Mr. Green and Mr. White. It's part of history, and it's got to be stated that we're proud of our history, and we will continue to be proud of our history. So that's a wee part of it. So for there, that game was absolutely brilliant, and it was a great day for everybody.
Well, it was. I mean, I suppose it's the bits round about it you begin to remember, because for all of us, it's not only the going to the games, it's the lead up to the games, it's who you remember being with at the time. So it's all of that comes back during this lockdown, and that's what I've most enjoyed. I remember who I travelled with the games, who was involved, all the circumstances round about it, and it brings you back, and it takes you back to where it all started. And I think for me that's the most interesting thing. I've never been a football player, but it takes me back to the 60s and first getting to know Celtic.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you said that though, because a game does transport you back in time, Paul. And I asked Brian McClure about that week leading up to Love Street. He says, I remember on a Tuesday going for a perm. But that was Brian McClure's recollection that week. He says, when it started raining at Love Street, I regretted getting that perm. You know, that's Brian McClare for you. But when you look back, you're saying being introduced to Celtic. What was your introduction? What's your early memories?
My early memories was my mum was a single mum, and we lived with my grandparents out in Eastwood. They'd moved out there from the Gorbals. I don't know when they moved, probably the late 50s, maybe early 60s. And there was I still can't. I was trying to work out for the podcast how many were in the 3-bedroom house, but I think it could have been 10, it could have been 11. And my uncle was my granddad, who had played a bit. He played for St Anthony's in Petershill, and he'd been offered terms by Chelsea and Everton just before the war. He was a Pollock fan. He went to Celtic. He'd go to Celtic matches for a while, but I think he liked to walk down to Shawlands, watch Pollock, have a beer, go home. My Uncle Brian would go to the games, and he kept a scrapbook, and I can remember 4 or 5 seeing the scrapbook with all the Lisbon lines, and all the stories of the 60s, and that's when he'd play out the back with me and stuff like that, and that's when I would really get into the Celtic. So those were my first memories.
You've mentioned the 80s as well as being a period that obviously you were totally invested in the club. Mm-hmm. The 70s, what's your memories of coming through the 70s? Did you start going to the games during that period?
Well, it's a strange thing, and maybe this informed my psyche when it was Celtic, was that my first memories were that house, the night of the European Cup final. I didn't know it was a European Cup final, but I knew there was tons of people in the house. I still think it was a black and white telly at the time, because I remember seeing colour for the World Cup final in 70, but the night of the game, I just remember everybody being really high and really happy when I went to bed. And I don't think it was a personal thing. I think it was we might have been winning at half time. I have no checked whether we were, but I knew we were ahead in the game. But when I woke up the next morning, it was like a morgue, and I just remember what's happened. It was just completely flat. So that was my first memory. My second memory was my Uncle Brian heading off about a year later to a cup final in a really good mood, and I was playing out the back, and I knew, although I was only 5 or 6, I knew that the times of the game, and he turned up about an hour and a half later, and I was like, the game can't be over. And he was like, no, well, we're losing 4-0 at half time, I've left. And I was like, what? I thought we were playing Partick Thistle. And I just couldn't take it in. That team had lost. And I got a question for you when I was thinking about it. He said to me, Jimmy Johnson didn't leave the centre circle for the first 45 minutes. And I was like, and I'd heard the stuff about the European Cup final. So my first association with Celtic was that there was always something going on, and that when we lost, there was a reason why we lost. But I don't know, Sammy, do you remember that?
No, actually I don't.
That was a game when Glavin took him out in the first few minutes.
Was it?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Paul. Glavin hit him hard, and that was him, and Paul probably finished the rest of the game.
So when we were going for 9 in a row back then, were you too young to actually go to the games and enjoy it that way?
I was too young. I think my first game was I get taken along to Celtic Park, and I think it was November. It was either November 70 or 71, and we drew 1 each with Aberdeen. And I was checking back, 64,000 at the game. So I mean, Aberdeen were a good side then, eh? And it was. I just remember that I was sitting in the main stand. And when I was 6 years old or whatever, and I had no understanding of what was going to happen. The team came on the park, everybody stood in the main stand. The roar was incredible, and I was like, there was a bit of tears in my eyes. I was like, what's going on here? But the game is good, apart from Big Billy scored an own goal, and it was a 1 each draw. But that was my first game, and then I got to a few games after that. I remember going. I'd been at a few different schools, not because I'd been chucked out, but my mum was a supply teacher, so I went to the same schools as her. And I ended up in Bishop Briggs eventually in primary 6 and 7. And there was a boy called Stephen Burt who was a friend, and his dad was Hugh Burt, and Hugh Burt was a photographer for Celtic. And,
that's right, eh?
And they took me along to the boardroom. I think it was in 75, and I actually think it was a game against Ayr United, and it might have been the day when Rangers won the league. But it was a great thing to go see the boardroom and meet everybody, and I probably met quite a few of the players that day. So at that stage I was about 10, 11. I really started getting into it, Paul, when I was about 15, 16, and then I would just head from Bishopbriggs into town, take the train along to Belgrove and walk up to the game, especially Wednesday nights, because football was great then. You know, people talk about it, but you know, Celtic were great. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a revisionism now about how Aberdeen were fabulous, Dundee United were fabulous, and we were kind of hanging on their coattails. If you go back and look at the early 80s to the mid 80s, we were the dominant team, but we get great games against them. Yeah. And, you know, Wednesday nights we would say there was 40,000 in the ground, but you knew there was 55, 60,000 in the ground. It was absolutely jumping. And I just loved going that, and you saw great teams. The Dundee United team was a great team. But, you know, part of the looking back and seeing the footage now is we had a fabulous team. You know, our midfield with Paul McStay, with Murdo, with Tommy Burns, with Davy Proven. You know, it was just a joy, and we had great strikers. We had Brian McClare, who you mentioned. My favourite, and it was the age I was, because I had my hair in the same kind of style, was Charlie Nick. I just thought
a wee wedge,
Paul.
Actually, I'm looking at you, big man, and I can actually picture you with that wedge. Anyway,
I just loved Charlie. He was just so. It wasn't really. I don't think he was. You know, because some of you'll have seen Gallus Celtic players. He had a swagger about him.
He did,
and he just moved through people, and you didn't know how he get by people.
Perpetual movement, wasn't it?
Right.
It was great the way he glided by people, and obviously I think my best memory of Charlie Nicholas was when we were at Ibrox, and that goal he scored right between Big Peter McCloy's hands. That's a great memory, isn't it?
Oh, I know. He really, for somebody who was, I think it was a couple of years younger than Charlie, it was just that he was a proper idol. You know, my mates earlier had all loved Dalglish, but I hadn't seen enough of Dalglish, and I didn't have the same attachment to him. I had an attachment to Charlie. I thought his gear was fabulous. I thought his hair was fabulous, and I thought, you know, and it's people nowadays who sometimes say about his Sky Sports stuff, or when he said something critical of Celtic. When you see him sitting in the booth watching Celtic in the European matches, and you see him celebrating when we score at the end, you know, he's a proper Celtic fan, and you know, I loved him. I thought it was great.
You're right, Paul. He was a proper Celtic fan, and obviously the decision from the goal down south to Arsenal. But coming back to Glasgow at that particular time, Charlie Nick actually had a good sense of dress, and a lot of that age group at that time, they all seem to have round about the same dress sense. I don't know if the young ones today have got the same, and they can look at the players of today and say, "Oh, I'm going to dress like them." But I loved that dress sense back then.
Is this moving into Celtic Dash territory or what?
Aye, well, definitely.
It sounds a bit like that, but to be fair,
all right, Celtic Dash we are.
Olivier and Chan wearing Prada tracksuits and all that, it's not going to catch on. It's not going to catch on. But Paul, it does beg the question, if you hit the wedge, did you wear your leather jacket sleeves up? Did you fail to wear socks? Did you do the full thing?
I did the full thing.
DJ, brilliant, son of all by the way.
I used to go for my clothes, and I don't know how I funded that, because I wasn't particularly street smart. So I used to go to Martinique for my clothes and have the Miami Vice look. So
Did you wear socks, Paul?
No.
You see, you're still not wearing them today.
You've got a picture of me now, haven't you?
Oh, brilliant.
That was excellent. I was speaking to one of his teammates. I think it was someone who was only there for a short spell, Willie Garner, and he said that Charlie used to get fined for not wearing socks by Billy McNeil, but he just continually didn't wear them. And he was one of the guys, I don't think he actually did get fined, Paul, because he did the business on the park, you know.
I think you need sort of talisman in teams, and I suppose a bit later on you saw the same with Frank McAvenny, you know, fabulous player, but who really led the team. And even although Nicholas was young, he was just that centre point. And the whole of the 80s, my memories are Celtic always had people like that, and you had that fabulous creative midfield behind. I know we used to have what was known in Not The View as the sieve behind that, but we were always going forward, and it was a joy. I can remember going to cup finals in the 80s, and probably the most heartbreaking one was that one when Packy came from that cross and just flapped at it, and Aberdeen, scored in extra time, and I think we'd been down to 10 men that day. But so there was always that feeling that it could go wrong, but that actually made it better when it went right. And even right at the end of the 80s when you had the cup final against the other side, and we got that 1-0 victory. I remember that as being just the sweetest, and that because I'd lived in Italy in the mid to late 80s for a year, and I'd watched a lot of Italian football, and I think Souness was still there when I was there, and when I heard Souness was going to Ibrox, I thought he knows how to do things, and then when you saw the money that came in, however it came in, to support him, you just knew it was going to be hard for us. And so that made it really joyful when we won, when Joe Miller struck that home. And the sun always seemed to be shining. When we won the cup finals in the 80s, it was always a brilliant day. I thought I was worried at that time, and obviously, there was joy that day. I think the real killer though for me was, no matter what somebody says, I've still not forgotten him, or forgiven him rather, when Johnson signed for them. That was a real turning point. And I think that, when you look back, I was working in a law firm at the time, and they were Rangers lawyers, and I remember them all whistling around the building that day, so happy, because they knew that was a real sword in us. Yeah. And I think he really helped them set up theirs.
I definitely, Paul. But sorry, don't misinterpret what I was saying. What I was meaning was that he was part of that game.
Oh.
But can I forgive him for what he done? Be going to over there, but he was part of history there,
and he was a great player.
He was a great player, but I can't forgive him. He done what he done, and that's it.
But I think it also makes you appreciate again. There's some players who we're all in love with Tommy Burns. We're all in love with a lot of the players in the 80s, and through the hard time, Paul McStay shouldered everything. But there's others there who sometimes get a hard time from our support. And I remember John Collins has been superb for us.
Yeah,
John Collins was class. And I think we should all remember, I think he turned them down. He turned Rangers down at least twice. So, that was fabulous for us. And just a real quality player and a professional. And they might have a six-pack, but you can't hold that against them.
I find Collins a really interesting character in Scottish football, Paul, because I watched Collins coming through from him signing right through to your left, really, at Celtic Park. And as you say, he was a class act at Celtic. But he obviously went and got educated as well on the way that players conditioned themselves elsewhere, not just in Scotland. And trying to implement that in Scotland, obviously a difficult thing for him. To the point where a few weeks ago he says he doubts that he'll ever manage again in Scotland because of the culture in the country. But you've mentioned Maurice Johnson. I didn't mention him. In fact, Jim brought him into the conversation. So Charlie Nicholas, he was idolised. He was an idol. Mo Johnson was idolised as well, probably more than Brian McClare, who scored a lot more goals than him.
That's right, yeah.
So I think what you were saying there regarding Rangers, that was Rangers getting the upper hand on Celtic, which was more important than anything, including the religion of the guy that they signed to them.
Sure.
And it was only in 1989, bearing in mind we'd won the double in 88, and there started that dominance for the next 9 seasons. During that period, the other 9 in a row, how dark was that as a Celtic fan for you?
It was pretty horrible. I mean, I think, because I associated football with joy, and at the same time I'd been doing pretty well in my studies, and I'd come back to Glasgow, and I'd qualified as a lawyer, and I ended up going in, as I say, to a top commercial firm who were Rangers lawyers at the time, and you know, there was a lot of chat, but you know, you were very, very much in the minority, I reckon, in that company that I was with then. There might have been 50 to 70 lawyers, and you know, I'd have been the only Celtic supporter. Mm-hmm. There was one Highby and myself, and so it was a strange environment, and not one I was used to. I can remember actually we got tickets for the Old Firm game at Ibrox in, I think it was 1989, and I get taken aside and told their main stand tickets. And at that time, and people probably won't remember this, is Rangers couldn't sell out their season tickets. You know, not only did we get the whole of our end, we got a bit of the enclosure, we had a bit of the Govan as well, and that day they had me in the main stand. So, but the main stand behind the director's box was not season ticket, so it was all the buses from Northern Ireland that were there. So I hadn't a clue about this when I got my ticket, and the highway was saying to me, he said, "Look, whatever you do not move," you know. And I was like, "I'm not going to move. I'm not stupid." So I think we'd been beaten. We'd been beaten, hammered, I think, in the first league match, and then we'd won 3-0 in November on a Monday night or something like that, I think we'd won. And I'd been at the 3-0 game and we'd thumped them. But we were going there. I can't remember what the expectation was, but I didn't expect to jump. And we got a free kick just outside the box. I think McAvenny was brought down. And of all players, Chris Morris stepped up and stroked the ball right into the back of the net. And it was literally the second minute. And I was at the end of a row. And, you know, you just do what comes automatically. And I stood up, arms up in the air. And it was that kind of silence before everybody in the main stand reacted. And then it was just pelters. And this cop came down and I thought, I'm getting thrown out. And he said, "Who's a silly boy then?" Yeah. He said, just you sit down, I'll look after you, just stay. And I thought, that's fantastic. And I thought that up until half time when it was 3-1 to them. And everybody in the main stand knew who I was. So I was getting pelters. And I thought, I'll stay. And then I think Anton Rogan gave away a penalty in about the 66th minute. And I thought, I've had enough.
Calm before the storm.
So,
I'm off.
4-1, and I said to the cop, I said, can you get me out? And he said, "Oh, on you go." So I think he was actually a Celtic fan. He was commiserating with me. So I went up the road and I had to walk up, and I was trying to get back to Bishop Briggs, and I was getting a lift. And the girl had arranged to pick me up hadn't known that the game had started at 2:00. So I was standing at Hagg's Castle for an extra hour as every Rangers supporter went by on the way back celebrating. So it was not a good start to 1989 or 1990. But yeah, dark days.
I remember it well, the 4-1 game. In the same season, they beat us 5-1.
Aye.
One of them was in sunshine, the other not so much. But you made a few points here. Firstly, you're talking about memories of playing the likes of Aberdeen, and there was 64,000 there. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the capacity was 82,000 before it was redeveloped. Would that be right at Celtic Park?
Aye.
And you look at the pictures, you think, where did they fit the other 20,000 into that?
I know. I mean,
Shenanigans.
And look, I think those shenanigans came back to bite us in the early 90s. I moved legal firm, and we started the firm I was at, the lawyer, who wasn't he didn't go to see Celtic all the time, but he'd decided he was going to be a Celtic fan. And he's a top guy. And he got in touch with Fergus, and from Canada we started doing work with Fergus. And it was really just keeping an eye on what the board were up to and what the press was like. And Fergus used to dot back and forward, so I got to see him occasionally. And you'd occasionally see the likes of Brian Dempsey coming into the meeting rooms as well. And that was really beginning of my sort of corporate involvement with Celtic. We did a bit in the background on the takeover. I didn't know too much about what was happening in the takeover, but I knew you could see the meetings taking place at Candle Rigs. You could see the personalities, and I began to get to know a few of them involved. And then eventually in the mid-90s, I joined a corporate finance firm who were advising Celtic. And that brought me into contact with everybody like Eric Riley, Fergus, all the time. Tommy Burns was manager at the time. So you were beginning to see a picture of what was really going on, the pressures they were under. I got to meet people like Willie Hockey, John Keane, various others, and you formed a picture of those who were, who now are treated, as saints, and those who don't get the credit for what was done at that time, because I certainly saw who really put their shoulder to the wheel. And maybe, Eric Riley would be an example of that. Eric wasn't a Celtic man originally. He was the finance director at the time of the takeover. But Eric was with us for, tens of years and did a fabulous job. And Fergus, delivered exactly what he said he was going to do. But I think it's sometimes forgotten that, when the Celts for Change thing was going on, that it was the likes of Willie Hockey, who obviously I know really well. I've known for 20 years. But Willie and Tommy did the rounds. They did all the supporters to get the money in for the share flotation. They went to Ireland. Willie and John Keane, I think, were the people who actually found Dermot. And Dermot was absolutely critical. And Dermot's, I think we all think he's a billionaire, he doesn't need any credit. But you've got to say, over the last 25 years,
absolutely,
he has been the continuing, the support. Let's not forget that there's nobody put as much money into Celtic and where Celtic are now as the support. But Dermot's sat there, basically in control, and helped get us where we are today. And it was, we were in a really bad place.
It must be fascinating to get that insight, Paul, as a Celtic fan, and deal with people that, for example, Tommy Burns, who you've mentioned, who, again, would have been an idol on the football park for you. Did you get to know somebody like Tommy a wee bit better?
I didn't get to know Tommy. I'd be coming in the other side. I think Tommy would see suits coming in and think, oh, here you go. It can't be very pleasant when, you're putting your heart and soul into, and I think as we've heard in various podcasts, the amount of strain he was under to try and stop the 10. And all he wanted was resources. And we didn't have the same resources as across the city. I'd see bits and pieces of it. And it was quite hard for me, because I was probably more of a fan than an advisor. And I was like, I could see what the budget was, and I was thinking, we need more quality. And if you look at what Tommy got, and what he spent and what he delivered, he was a Mark Reaper away from stopping 9. It was that that's what was missing. Mm-hmm. And people blamed Tommy for not getting a defender, but he didn't have a budget. It was one of those things. It was an absolute joy to sit and watch. My favourite was Cadeti. I thought Cadeti was just the most brilliant striker, penalty box striker I've ever seen at Celtic Park.
Absolutely, he was excellent.
But Di Canio, Van Hooijdonk, Andy Tom less so, but, when you look at that game against Kilmarnock from the mid-90s, I mean, it's just phenomenal. And it's that way that you see the crowd at the back, and you're just like, and you see the waves coming from the Celtic, and you're just like, that's what Celtic's about. You can see the crowd just behind the goals going nuts. And you've got the Canio scoring, you've got Cadet slamming it in, waving his arm round and stuff like that. It's an absolute joy, and we were just that tiny bit short.
You touched on moving into the law firm, and you were the only Celtic fan, so I'm trying to equate that to being the only Catholic in the law firm as well. I'll say that. I don't know if that's the case. And that, to you, when you look back, was the norm at that time, and not just in that industry, but in various industries in Scotland.
It was certainly the norm. And, if you think back, everybody in my family, my mum, all my aunts and uncles, everybody was teachers. Now, that wasn't because, teachers do a fabulous job, but that wasn't because they weren't capable of being engineers. That wasn't because they weren't capable of doing finance or law. that was because in certain parts, especially in law and corporate law, you couldn't get an opportunity. There was just no way through. So, people went where they could get opportunities. And, you see that in America now. Still, it's not, people don't get the opportunities. So you have to actually open things up. In the law firms, eventually, I got through, but only got so far. And it was only when I moved into corporate finance and I moved into Anderson's, which was a worldwide firm, that I could start to, it really felt that meritocracy. I know it's changed now. I think it only changed in the early 2000s. It started to really change. And I think, it's a function of, because people won't put up with it anymore. And I think what it kind of time lagged in football. I think you still saw the vestiges of with the referees strike, with the leagues thing, with their liquidation. You saw machinations that you wouldn't see in other walks of life. So it takes time to clear out, but I think we're getting there. People, when I look back, again, I've looked back on who's done a job for Celtic. I call out for Paul McBride. I think Paul McBride did a fabulous job for us.
Yes, definitely, Paul.
Through I think 2009 to 2011 or whatever, he was superb for us. And just that quality again. Somebody who I don't think he was a Celtic man. I don't think I didn't know Paul, but I didn't know him as a huge Celtic man. He was one of these guys who was excellent at his profession, but suddenly came to the fore and put his heart and soul into representing Celtic.
I mean, you mentioned Paul, and we know the threats he was under even at that time, 2009, 2011. You're talking about how some industries may have changed, but a lot of society hasn't changed, Paul. But I like the fact that you brought up revisionism, because it happens, and I don't think a lot of the time fans try to revise history, but they just don't know the facts. And if you've got that insight, it's great to put a few records straight. A lot of fans believe that a lot of Celtic's downfall was down to the fact that there was this conspiracy against us from, for example, the banks, and they played their part. Do you think that is revisionism? Was it all the old board's fault, or were there other forces against Celtic?
No, I'd certainly see in banking terms, certainly from my experience through the late 80s and 90s, you would have struggled to find anybody with any empathy, never mind sympathy for Celtic. In banking terms, and I think the combination of mismanagement on part of our board and actually having nowhere to go, it's no surprise Celtic ended up with a co-op bank. Fergus took us there because there was he didn't trust who he was dealing with elsewhere. I'm sure he didn't trust that information wouldn't slip out. So I think. No, we had no friends in the banking world, and I think I think the other team had a network of support, and I think that we were right up against it. And you come through. I mean, that was part of the reason I think Fergus. One of the things just before Fergus's exit was that we looked at buying Wimbledon for Celtic, and I was involved in that project and went across to see the Norwegian owner, who was a billionaire by the name of Aker. It was Aker Industries. He was in oil and gas and shipping and fisheries. And he owned Wimbledon at the time. Sam Haman was the manager. They had a fantastic squad. It was Neil Sullivan was in goals with various other players there. The squad, I think the squad was valued in those days. And you remember that was at the time, let's say somebody like Reaper would be 2 million. Their squad was valued at 50 million when we valued them. And Aker came to Celtic Park with me, and had a look at the stadium and went, this is absolutely perfect. He said, I don't want any money out. I want you to buy Wimbledon, and I will take shares in Celtic, because I think this can be the biggest club on the planet. He said, and this is a Norwegian businessman, no affiliation with Celtic. no knowledge of the history of Celtic, but he just looked at it, did some research and said, if I can flip my club into Celtic, Celtic can be bigger than Man United, and much bigger than Man United, because he just said, you've got everything here. You've got the whole history, you've got the ability to go forward, you've got a great culture, you've got an association with attacking football, you've got support throughout the world, you've got a diaspora, and he saw it, and Fergus saw it, but unfortunately some on the board didn't see it, and I despaired when the board decided that, you know, the way forward, because obviously Sky was the issue, Sky and the English FA, and they said, you know, let's try and do it by persuasion, and I was just more of and Fergus was like, you don't persuade anybody, you batter down the door, you go and take the court actions, you do everything. And at that time, there was an argument that the way the UEFA rules were, you could have made a case on it, and then obviously after we decided not to do it, UEFA had got wind of it, and UEFA changed the regulations.
Yeah. Was that 98, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was my biggest regret, because, you know, I think when we get through to the Martin O'Neill years and we have the fabulous time there, and that still doesn't get us to where we want to be. Yeah. I look back in that, I think, you know, if we got into the Premier League then by force, and it might have taken a number of years, it might have been painful, but we would have been away from that banking cabal. We would have been away, we would have missed all the EBT nonsense and all the rest of it. So, you know, and nobody, you know, I think we all forget it now that we're in the going for 10 in a row. But it's really shocking. And sometimes when you're away and you're listening to, I listen to everything. I listen to BBC Scotland, I listen to Radio Clyde. And when you're listening to it and your panellists are on and you know that they're the taxman. And obviously decisions haven't been made yet. Final notices have come out and all the rest of it, but you're thinking, really, is that what you want to represent sport? You know, that's my personal opinion. I don't think we should move on. It should be clean, and I don't like the fact that some things are still being brushed under the carpet.
Mm-hmm. I find what you've informed us about Wimbledon there absolutely intriguing, fascinating, Paul. 1998, Fergus McCann was interested in buying the club, and that was Celtic's route in English football.
Definitely, yeah.
We'd have still been based in Glasgow.
There was never any intention to move south. It was to make the case, and my understanding, certainly the plan that I was involved with, and ultimately it wasn't signed off by the board, so it was never official Celtic policy, but the plan was to be in Glasgow and to be in the Premier League. And if others got into the Premier League off the back of us down the line, so be it. But this was a Fergus plan, which I know he went to other senior businessmen and got input into, and it was about what's in the best interest of Celtic. Now, obviously, Fergus would have done very well out of it. If we had managed to tee that up or even started down that road, the shares would have gone through the roof. But Fergus's view was, and he was right, as what we saw afterwards, was that Scotland wasn't a level playing field. It wasn't a fair game. So, you know, his view was you need to be playing somewhere where it's actually a fair sporting contest. And for us, it would have been fabulous. I would have loved to have seen us in that. And if you look again, then after that, after Fergus left, Alan McDonald came in and he tried the Atlantic League, and it was always, and I know there's a lot of downside about that. And I know people say, you know, would you rather be going to play St Johnstone, or would you be playing Bruges, or would you be playing Schalke or something like this? What's the history? What's the attraction? But it showed you that we've always been trying to find a route to actually give us an environment where people can see how big Celtic really are. And you know, I think that's something I'd still love to see. I still think, I think that, you know, certainly heard things about Celtic looking at the States, and, you know, I think we all hear those rumours on a wee cyclical basis. And you do think the pandemic may change things.
It may open up opportunities that weren't there. Absolutely. 22 years ago, had Celtic left Scottish football, do you reckon we'd be up there at the top table year on year in the Champions League?
I definitely think so, yeah. You can see now that down south there's maybe six big teams. And it then comes back to probably your culture and the quality of investment. We're sitting in the Jimmy Johnson Academy, and it's the quality of investment and the ethos of the club, the quality of investment and the way the club plays. Whether you've got an Ajax model or whether you've got and how much you invest in training, how much you invest in your youth. I think one of the things one of the downsides about Fergus, I would say, and nobody really goes there anymore, was Fergus got his return on his investment, 6 or 9 million. He got his 41 million. But that exit document was structured in a way it wasn't impossible, but it was never going to happen that money was left for the academy. Never in a million years were the fans going to be able, after putting in the biggest fundraising that's been seen for a football club. You can't then go back to the well and ask people who are still in Glasgow, still in relative poverty, to go and put up 20 million to send somebody off into the sunset. This isn't going into the team, this is going into somebody's pocket.
Yeah, bang on, Paul.
So, as much as, and there's a degree of revisionism now where people go, I wasn't a guy that booed Fergus when the flag was raised, and I'll say, I wasn't a guy that booed Fergus, but I was a guy that was quite sympathetic to some of them who were very annoyed by the fact that we'd lost our manager and that we were getting no investment in the team and that Jock Brown was still sitting there. It wasn't a happy time after stopping 10 and having a team that was of good quality, not great, but with a very good manager who knew what he was doing. To be in a position that we were in then was down to Fergus. So, I think that, and not leaving even a million for the academy, left us in a position where we have Lennoxtown with an indoor arena, which is quite frankly
a game's hall. You've been up there, Paul, and you've seen it, and I think you're right, but I think Fergus missed the trick where if he would have built that academy to the way that it was visualised, that would have been another big part of his legacy, that it would have been a training facility second to none. It would have been up there with the Carringtons and such. Mm-hmm. But I was disappointed that we never got that academy from Fergus, which we knew was promised. But again, I'm the same as yourself. When that flag was raised, I never booed Fergus either, and I don't think it was right that we did do it. We could feel, right, Fergus, that wee part of the deal, you never came forward with it, and we're disappointed. But to boo him, I don't think was right. But hopefully, going forward with the Celtic people that we've got today, that the academy will go from strength to strength, and it will be a fitting legacy for the Celtic people and for Celtic Football Club going forward, Paul.
I mean, I think it's something that you guys will know much better than me, is that we never seem to have invested a significant amount in the best, I would say the best that you could get in terms of coaching. I don't know if that's...
No, I would agree with you on that, aye.
Don't know if that's fair, but you would have... And I know there's always a thing about what returns you get out of an academy, but, I would have thought that in the days where we were building up reserves, that if you wanted to look for, well, how can we do better in the future, without having to just play in the transfer market all the time, which, look, they've done really, really well over the last 10 years on the whole. But, if you can pull the best coaches from France or the best coaches from, can you deliver something a little bit better? Can you put more money into it? Because it doesn't seem to me as if we've put a lot of money into that over the years and really done something different. I applaud things like, and I think things like the St Ninians and Kirky and stuff like this, and doing that thing for the boys and making sure that it's integrated the football education in your education. I get that, but I'm not sure whether, and I'm not having a go at our coaches out there, but I'm not sure whether, when you look at the proportions of money that's available, whether we've spent what we should have spent there. You know, the certainly, you know, from the time that Fergus left, and I heard in the podcast the other day, really, like Celtic, I see like everybody else is. It's when Fergus takes over, it's like the new world. When Fergus leaves and Dermot's in charge, you can see immediately that they backed the managers, you know. And Martin coming, you know, Martin changed everything. You know, it's the smallest things you remember. And, you know, when I was thinking about today, I was thinking about when you'd be in a pub in Glasgow after a game, and you're celebrating, the whole pub would go quiet when Martin O'Neill was interviewed. Mm-hmm. Everybody would just go shh, and it'd be like the whole pub would shut up to listen to Martin. And you thought, we all did that, and you now know the players all did that because they totally followed him.
Yeah, and they still regard him as the gaffer as well to this day, you know. Another couple of questions on Fergus before we move into this era. The Jim Farry fiasco, is that something that just fed what he already realised about Scotland and that need to get out of the country?
I think that's definitely the case. I mean, I listened, I think again through lockdown, I listened to a podcast on the SFA and on Farry. It was exceptionally interesting, on referees, on how things were allocated, on the famous Bobby Tate talking about how he got that game. You know,
right,
it's just
a wee farewell game. I know.
You know, none of this would happen in any other country, and you're thinking about what is it about. I think Scotland's a fantastic place, but what is it about it that there's certain aspects that keep repeating, whether it's referees, whether it's the banking stuff, whether it's EBTs. You know, Scotland would be far better without. And look, to be fair, I think the society's changed tremendously, and you can see that people want joy in their life and not any of that underhand. But that's what Fergus was faced with. And I think the other thing is, Fergus had obviously left Scotland at a very early age. He'd gone to a place where he hadn't faced that discrimination. He'd made his money there, and it must have been astonishing to come back and effectively go back in time, where he's sitting looking at something that's not moved on. So, you know, and I think obviously a lot of the people who are around and about and supporting and helping Fergus were trying to educate him on how to get through some of those. And maybe sometimes Fergus was the battering ram when he was being advised by others, look, you know, whether it be Tommy getting appointed, whether it be Jim Farry, there may be other ways to doing it. And whilst I would have said, go ahead with the Wimbledon thing, full pelt, you know, on each of these there would have been different ways to do it.
You know, when Fergus McCann is on his way out, there's a suggestion that he advised the new men coming in, don't bring Kenny Dalglish to the club.
Oh yeah, he definitely did.
Now was that a personal thing that Fergus had with Kenny Dalglish?
I have a view that it probably was. I think Fergus had a very clear view on fans and supporters, and he viewed people who were in it for Celtic or who were in it for themselves. And I think for whatever reason I formed the view that he viewed Kenny as being potentially dangerous to Celtic, because I don't think he saw him necessarily having the discipline that on finances, etc., and that he might be in a position that that things could go wrong. So I think he's I think he was very concerned, and I think Fergus didn't hold back. I think he was very clear that he didn't think it was the right road to go. And as it turned out, you know, I heard the podcast. I mean, I can remember being told by the guy I worked with at the time that, he wasn't a football man. And I remember him telling me, you know, you'll never guess who you've got as manager. And I was sitting there going, he's a world star, and he's got so many caps for England, and he's just going to be astonishing. And I was like, I honestly can't think. He kept giving me these clues, and I was like, no, it can't be that. Is it him? Is it him? Is it him? And he said, it's John Barnes. And I can remember just like, you cannot be serious. You just can't be serious. You can't give this big a job to somebody.
A rookie.
Yeah.
And I listened to John's podcast, and I have to say, I totally agree with the unconscious bias. Myself and Simmy have had a few ding-dongs about it.
We have, Paul, yes.
I totally agree with him on that. But as Simmy put it to me, and I do think what you're saying about getting less time was right. But I think you've also then got to step back and look at your managerial quality and what you were delivering. And I think the most interesting thing was John did say, I wasn't going to get it right. And he wasn't going to get it right because it was his first job. And he was quite clear. He had people who were working against him from day one. Mm-hmm. I think, though, a non-rookie manager wouldn't have known how to deal with people working against them from day one. And I also think John, and again, maybe Fergus, this shows how right Fergus was about it, was I don't think John was helped by Kenny. There was no sign of Kenny Dalglish taking any heat off him at the time that I remember. And so I think he was out there on his own. But ultimately, it led to Martin, and that was, if you look back on the last 20 years since Martin came in the door, it's been fabulous.
It has. I mean, the very first interview you gave, there was a statement of intent there, Paul, and he stuck to that. The club did back the managers. They backed John Barnes. He spent a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Martin comes in, completely different transfer strategy, starts buying players in from England and utilising what we already had. Mm-hmm. Now, there comes a point, the Seville era, like what you say, we get to a European final and we're losing money because of the environment in which we're playing, the league in which we're playing. And that's 5 years after we've tried to get an exit out of Scottish football. At that point, that's when Peter Lowell comes in. Mm-hmm. Do you think, had Celtic not tightened up financially at that point, there would have been an issue?
I don't think we necessarily did tighten up financially at that point. I think looking back on it, we bought a lot of excellent players, 2001, 2002. I think they were very good buys. I think maybe we held on to them too long. And I think my recollection when Peter came in was there was a raft of extension of deals given to people who actually, maybe now Peter would have probably moved on a little bit more. Again, I think one of the frustrations was, and you shouldn't focus on the frustrations because the joy of the Seville year was just tremendous. And even the joy the following year, beating Barcelona. And that was a cracking Barcelona team. Yeah. When people say, that Neil's victory against in 2011 was the pinnacle. That Barcelona team was the best that's ever been seen. But the Barcelona team with Ronaldinho and the rest of them there, I mean, they absolutely pummeled us for 90 minutes. I can remember I was up in the top tier and you're looking down and, we just did it. We had somebody on our side that night because, not only the goalie did a fabulous job and also against Rangers the following Sunday, but they were superb. And to come out of that singing, they gave us James McGrory coming down the new camp after a match was just, it lives with me. Those are the, it's just the wee side memories you've got. You go back, you see it on YouTube and you remember being there and it still brings it back up the back of your neck.
When Martin O'Neill came in, I think we had finished the season 21 points behind Rangers the previous year. Mm-hmm. To turn that round, it was emphatic at that time. The signings were key to that. Rangers were still spending big. At any point, did anyone around about you say, where are they getting that money when it comes to Rangers?
I myself couldn't work it out because I thought I couldn't. But remember, their debt was rising. It was rising to a point where I think, Celtic fans have always been really interested in their own club, and because we'd saved the club, we were always very aware, and there was always that battle about will we spend a little bit more, whereas across the road you could see the spending was just continuing and continuing. When you saw Tory Andrew Flo coming in for 12 million, you're just like, this doesn't make any sense. But you didn't know enough about it to know there's something wrong here. I suppose I thought there was going to be a pullback when McLeish took over there, and then there didn't actually seem to be. There was still, my recollection was that it wasn't, I think it was under McLeish that you had the De Boers coming in. So they were still bringing in, and it was only right towards the end of McLeish that they started to pull back. And that's when it started to be a level playing field. And yeah, I mean, I was waiting for years for them to fall. And to be fair, I read Craig White's book. It wasn't Craig White that took them down. It was, it was an accumulation of years of it, and it was losing 2 European ties that year. So it was losing. I can't remember who they lost to. I think they lost to a Slovenian team and they lost to a Swedish team or something.
Malmo.
Yeah.
Aye.
That took them down eventually. But when you saw what came out about the taxes and stuff, one of the things when I was a lawyer was, no matter how bad it was in a case, you could always find a counsel who'll give you an opinion that you could win this case. And you look back and you look on how, and I know they fought the case right to the Supreme Court, but I think there was quite a lot of opinion that loans that are never going to get repaid, this is not right.
During the O'Neill years as well, some of the talents that we saw flourish, and I know that they came in before Martin O'Neill did, but the likes of Lubo Moravcik, Henrik Larsson. What's your memories of those kind of glorious players playing for Celtic?
I mean, it was such a difference from. I mean, I think I went 13 games to Ibrox before I saw us get a draw, because I used to go up to Celtic and if you look down to the right hand side of the main stand at Ibrox, there used to be a big clock up there, and at the start of the game I'd look at it and it was better, and I'd watch it. And I'd keep watching it and just thinking, can we get out of here with a draw? Because the imbalance in resources. One of the highlights, actually, I must say, was when we put out a terrible Celtic team. I think it was formed by one game, and when they were going for 10 in a row, and Goff scored. I was in the Celtic end that day, and he put he's revised his view about what he was actually signalling to the crowd, and I think we all knew what he was signalling to the crowd. So when he put his two hands up, it was just despair. You were just thinking, I cannot see this. I can't see all that our 9 means to us going by the by. So stopping that, and then the next year we went to Ibrox, and I can remember we had, I think, Davy Hanna in midfield. So it wasn't the best of teams.
Scott Marshall at centre half.
Yeah, it was poor. And we came out with a 0-0 draw. But for 90 minutes we just said cheerio 10 in a row, and it was a fabulous day. So moving from that, where you're celebrating effectively just holding your ground, to then going to Ibrox with the likes of Henrik, Alan Thompson, Lubo, Chris Sutton, Stan Petrov, people you knew who would stand up for you and who wouldn't give an inch, and even the likes of Jackie McNamara and stuff. I mean, absolute terriers, people who just were not going to give into that ground, and who would not. And it wasn't show. Sometimes we've had show ponies who will, even to an extent, I can remember DeCanio when we were trying to stop their 9, getting involved with fights with Ian Ferguson, and you were just like, come on, win the game. Don't do that. We're not falling for that show pony stuff. But when you saw them doing, when that team went with Martin O'Neill, and even looking at just the bench, you just saw it was one team united, and it was brilliant. My favourite actually memory was, and again they changed the. It was just like we'd come back from 21 points down. We'd won the league. We were going to Ibrox at the end of the first year for Martin's year, and the papers all started saying this is the start of next season. This is putting a marker down for next season. It doesn't matter what's happened before. This Old Firm game's the start. Dick's going to show Martin what's what. And we went along there, and it was a Sunday, and I think we all had the papers. And I can remember I was at the top tier, and I was a few rows behind the front. I think it was 3 rows back, and I can remember everybody in the front had the Sunday papers, and they're sitting reading the Sunday papers, and they're just like signalling, this doesn't matter to us. And then at half time, it was 0-0 at half time, and a few of the guys were crying out cigars as well. And I thought, this is great, coming to Ibrox and just saying, we are totally in control of this. And then the second half was one of the best second halves I've experienced watching it. Was watching an Old Firm match was that 45 minutes when Lubo scored those 2 goals was just beautiful. I mean, the wee man's he just tucked them all ends up, and Kloss was a good keeper, but I mean he sold them twice, and then Henrik scoring his 50th, and when you see him running at the crowd, and that's when the 5 is up, and it's like it was just joy.
I'm reliving it in my memory here.
I can see him.
My unconscious memories became very conscious now, Paul, and I can see it. It's absolutely brilliant.
And I think we were 2-0 up when Martin put on Sean Maloney. I think Sean must have been about 17 at the time, or I think he was very, very young. And I just thought, this is great. This is Celtic. This is young boys coming on. This is sunshine Ibrox I mean, it was brilliant. Loved it.
There was a couple of seasons during that period as well, Paul, and I know that you're a champion of this podcast and you listen to the episodes, but we had Gordon Marshall on. Now, what's your thoughts on Gordon Marshall's legacy as a Celtic player?
Well, I didn't. What would I say? I would say, look, anybody who fought the fight to try and stop their night, I've got all the time in the world for. What was really disappointing was that I think it seemed like the whole of the Celtic support were together. Everybody who'd ever been a Celtic fan was together the week before in Seville, and that was a real highlight. And it was a highlight even although we lost, and it was a highlight for me because I can remember being the first time I heard the Fields of Athenry was at Hampden in the Hampden season. And I can remember hearing it on nights like, for example, I think it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, heading over to Hampden and seeing us lose 3-1 to Thistle.
I remember it.
And, there maybe be, 20,000 in the ground that night. It was grim. It was grim following Celtic then. You were still very hopeful because Fergus had taken over, but you knew it was a long way back. You had, no offence to me, but you had players like Willie Faulkner playing up front. So there were hard times, and then hearing fast forward only 8 years, and you're in Seville before the match, and it's filling up, and 4/5 of the stadium is green and white, and you've got guys from all over the world turning up. You've got a huge contingent from Ireland coming. You've got everybody flying from everywhere, and then the field starts, and it was
something else, wasn't it?
For me, I was streaming. I was just like, I just thought, I remembered when I heard it at first, I remembered how bad it was, and it was about putting in the years, putting in the hard yards, and the whole Celtic support being there, and everybody who couldn't be there as well. And there was so much emotional investment for, you talk on the podcast about your fathers, your grandfathers,
absolutely,
your mum, everybody I knew who was a Celtic supporter, aunts who never really showed any inclination of it. Everybody came back to the fold then, and the team performed superbly that night. I had a chat one night with Johan Mjälby, who I got to know. And I think like Johan, like Henrik, etc., they all avoided ever watching it. But they said, like I think we all felt in the stadium, that there was a certain point in the second half where I thought, you know what, we're going to win this game.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so painful for it to be retched away. And really, as soon as Bobo went off, that it was only going to end one way. I never had this thing for Rab Douglas or whatever. Some people, and I know even now people go up to him and say things about it, but it wasn't that. Deco was a superb player. They were at it, and I think Mourinho said recently or whatever, I heard his quote saying, we would have done anything to win that game. You guys would have given anything, but you wouldn't have done anything. And there's that subtle difference.
Yeah.
But long story short is that you then, I think I went back to, we'd stayed down in Portugal, a group of us, and a lot of the boys were flying back and going straight to Kilmarnock. I was watching the game in Portugal, and what unfolded was just like, I knew, in fact, I worried as soon as Dundee scored that goal a couple of weeks beforehand. I think they scored to make it 6-1, 6-2.
Yeah, yep.
When that goal went in, I can remember going nuts and thinking that's going to come back.
Last minute goal, I think, Paul.
Aye. I thought that's going to come back and bite us. And so when I was watching the game, and okay, obviously missed a penalty and stuff like this, but when I saw what was happening at Ibrox, and I saw that them scoring for the first time, that amount of goals, Arteta getting a penalty in the last, which even now I look at and I go, how's that a penalty? It's like, so when they won the league, and I saw Gordon Marshall celebrating, I was just like, you cannot, that's just not on, no matter what. I'm not stinking for that. It's like, it's not far off Maurice Johnson in my eyes. It was just like it was putting a knife through your heart when you were aching, because we deserved to win the league that year. I don't recall the season getting pushed back much, but maybe
there was no danger of that ever happening, Paul.
So I just it wasn't good. So yeah, and to be fair, he was never up in my consciousness much prior to that. But
sorry about that, Paul.
So I think you've put him right in his consciousness, Paul.
So Paul, we had the glorious years of Martin O'Neill, and I do agree with you. He stopped the rot, he stopped the domination, and ever since we have reaped the benefits. There was a change in tact when Gordon Strachan came in, and I think he slowly but surely started to break down the team that O'Neill had built, and he started getting rid of some who were star names previously and building his own side. What was your experience? I know he won 3 titles out of 4. It wasn't everybody's cup of tea. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, when he came in, it obviously didn't start well with Artmedia, and I think that was a real shocker for us all. And although nearly clawed it back in the game at Celtic Park, it was not a great start. To be fair though, I thought the football was good in the first season. I remember it might have been maybe the start of the second season, seeing us take Rangers apart 3-0. I think I remember Baldy scoring a header, and I thought this is going to be okay. But I don't know, there was always something, and I know Strachan says now that he appears to get Celtic more now that he's out of the club than when he was there. And I found it very, I thought the football was verging on maybe a bit of an over-exaggeration, but soul-destroying. I didn't think it was Celtic that I was watching. And it frustrated me, because I can remember at the time I was watching, I don't know if they were called the reserves, but I was watching the younger team, and I was watching McGeady coming through, and I just thought, McGeady I thought he was a fabulous talent, and I wanted to see him all along. I wanted to see him playing in behind the strikers, because I thought he was creative. He knew how to score. He'd bang them in when he was in the younger teams, and I thought that's where he should play. And my recollection was he only played in behind the strikers once, and that was against Rangers in the League Cup final, and we tore them apart that day. And I always had a feeling, and once you've got it, was that Strachan was always trying to prove he was right rather than necessarily. So there was always a degree. You'd hear the degree of antagonism that there was in the changing rooms, and I don't know whether that was the same in every changing room, but I couldn't have imagined it happening in Martin O'Neill's changing room. I just wasn't. I kind of fell out. I was abroad for about a year and a half of his tenure, and I was absolutely, make no mistake, I was absolutely delighted that we came back and won the year when Tommy died. That was fantastic, and it was fantastic for that reason. It was also quite humorous because I know they were going for 4, weren't they, or whatever they called it, the quadrangle.
They did. Look at it. Is that the quadrangle? Is that when you were in the Caymans at that time, Paul?
I was in the Caymans, and they couldn't quite understand because it was an English firm I was working with, and I was only there for 9 months, but they couldn't quite understand why a guy from Glasgow wasn't rooting for the Gers against in the semis against Fiorentina, and I'd studied in Florence for a year. I used to go and watch Fiorentina, so when I saw them getting them in the draw, I thought, God, this could be great. And then actually I think it was a penalty shootout, because I don't think they scored any goals in the run up to the final, did they? They just won in penalties. But they got through in penalties that day, and I felt, after the quality of our run to get to Seville, the way we played football, I thought this is going to be. It was taking me back to the days of the 90s. I thought, this is surely, to goodness, they're not going to win it. But so supporting. It was Dick Advocaat who was the manager. And Zenit, St Petersburg, and it was, and again, I don't know if you recall, it got to about 60 minutes and it was still 0-0, and I thought, is this going to be, the triumph of anti-football? And it was worrying. And I can remember, actually, it was on that day, my mum was flying in from London, so and she's a Celtic supporter, and she's not a Rangers supporter. So when she was landing, she didn't know what the score was, and I was going to the airport when it was 1-0. And I got to the airport and I was waiting outside for her coming through baggage, and she just sees this dervish jumping around in the car park as the second one hit the net, and it was a good start to our break in Cayman. But I think that the whole time I just didn't think it was a fit. There was something not right, and I know it went from bad from the 4th year. And I also think I don't think Gordon was, or I don't think Strachan was supported. I think in that 4th season, everybody knew what we needed. Everybody knew we needed Fletcher.
Yeah.
And Peter Lawwell's been there forever and a day, and he's done some fantastic things. But it's an enormous sense of frustration for me how many times the blindingly obvious issues aren't addressed. And we've seen it over the last 6 years when, we should be getting into the Champions League every year, year on year. And we don't. In that final season from Brendan Rodgers, there was so much going on behind the scenes, none of which was Peter's doing, as I understand it. But it's a frustration, and it was a frustration in that last year for Strachan that he got a Willow Flood instead of Stephen Fletcher, because that's what we needed, and we'd have won the league if we had got it.
I agree with you, Paul. You look at the lack of goals in the second half of that league campaign. So many times we were drawn nothing each, for example, 1-1 draws. Willow Flood and Niall McGinn. McGinn came in for 90 grand from Derry City, and what we needed was Fletcher. Not too sure we'd buy him 11 years later, but that's obviously the chat. Backup, fourth choice striker. Talking of European finals, if you were to compare the extremities in the aftermath of Seville against Manchester, I think that tells its own story as well, between the two cheeks of the same arse, as Celtic and Rangers are often called, and that just blows that one right out of the water, I would suggest.
Yeah, I know. I was Seville was just superb from start. I mean, it's one of my other memories is, and you can't say too much. It's like, and I know people who know me know that where I work and who I work for, and it's like, you know, you come across people and who are Celtic supporters, and as we've talked about before, Simmy, who are good men and who go above and beyond for other people, for no benefit to themselves. And the first person I came across like that was John Keane, when he put his money into Celtic. And I don't know John well, but because I was doing work around the share offering and Fergus's exit, I came to know about what he did and the way he put his money in compared to everybody else. And he did not seek any benefit for it. And whenever I met him, or it was introduced to him in the boardroom or whatever else, a nicer man you couldn't meet.
I agree. Lovely man.
Really, really, just a lovely man. And likewise, when seeing what Willie Hockey has done over the years for Celtic and Celtic players, in terms of keeping the traditions alive, in terms of, you know, the medals, in terms of the individuals. It's not only the trappings or the trophies and keeping those things alive, but actually helping everybody associated with Celtic, helping the club, helping former players. Just great. But, you know, in relation to Seville, what flipped in my head there was, I just remember going to see, meet up with people at a hotel and pick up tickets, and Willie had got me my tickets. I'd been out virtually every round, and we'd travelled everywhere, and I can remember Willie sitting at a table, and there was basically people coming in for about 3 hours solid when I was there, and Willie was just sorting people out and helping people get to the ground and helping every aspect of them and their families and all the rest of it. And I thought, this isn't any fun for you. I mean, you've worked your whole life to go and enjoy it with your family and your friends, and actually you're just making sure everybody else has a good day. And you know, that came back into my mind of Seville, but it was just like, I can remember coming in, we travelled up from Faro, and we get out of a taxi in the middle of Seville, and you know what it was like. It was like you couldn't see for hoops. And just get out of the taxi and bump into somebody from my primary school, and it was just one of those things where every corner you turned, you met somebody, and every one of them has their own 30, 40, 50 years of following Celtic. You know, and it's fabulous, and it's those kind of, you know, that's a well run. Just a quick digress was we flew to. Myself and my mates, we'd travelled a few times with the support on the, what was it, Keen to Travel or whatever. Right. And sometimes those days work out well, sometimes they don't. We went to Finland, and anyway, long story short on this one, the flight was delayed 6 hours in Glasgow airport, so quite a lot of drink was taken, and the pilot had to remind everybody it wasn't a bus. And they're stamping their feet, and he's going on.
Obviously, he'd never been on a Celtic bus before the pilot. Yeah.
So we decided after that Helsinki trip that, you know, we would independently travel, and we travelled to Vigo, and we flew into Santiago, and we decided not to go straight to Vigo. We went to see the cathedral, and we were waiting in a bar at the side of the cathedral, and myself and Joe Donnelly, who's is a well-kent face in Glasgow. Joe, we get speaking in broken Spanish to this young guy at a bar about 10:30 in the morning. And anyway, the way Celtic sport is, you make an effort, And he says to us, like, have you seen the cathedral? And we're like, no, we're having our breakfast. We're just teeing up for the day. We'll go in and have a look later on. And he said, no, he said, you seem like a really good bunch. And we told him a bit of Celtic, and he said, okay. He said, do you think you'll appreciate this? Come and meet me in an hour's time at the side door. And we're like, right, okay. So he gets us in, and it turns out he's the sacristan. So he's the keeper of the keys for the cathedral. And he takes us into the back, and we're getting shown around all these places where you shouldn't go. And we're seeing all the pilgrims, and the pilgrims have walked from all over Europe. And, they're delighted to be there, but they're absolutely shattered.
The Road of St James.
So they're coming from Seville, because there's a silver route up from Seville. They come from Paris, they come from Switzerland, everywhere. And they're absolutely shattered. And all they want to do is see the tomb of St James. That's the final thing, and they get their book stamped. And we've flown in, and we've had a little refreshment in the morning. And the guy's taking us round separately. And then he says, like, give you a final treat. He said, just watch. He said, all these people coming. They go up there and they look down on top. They look down from the glass. He said, but I'm going to take you in to see St James. So he says to us, just follow us. So we're in the hoops, and he's like, just follow me. And you can, and there's quite a few of the pilgrims wondering what's going on. And we're following along up to where we know the tomb is, and we can see people going up the steps to over the top to look down on it. And he says, come here, come to the square there, come to the left. And we go down some steps, and some of the pilgrims start following us, because they can see that there's this door getting unlocked.
Brilliant.
And he's turning around, he's quite indignant with them. No. No, back.
Just the boys with the Celtic strips. Just the Celtic guys. That's all they're getting. Just think that'll be what it's like when you go to heaven. No, you all get back. You all get back. It's only you guys with the Celtic gear that's coming.
So he gets us in, he closes, locks the door behind us, and we come down the steps, and there's a wee turn to the right, and it opens up, and you see the tomb there. And he said, look, here you go, it's Tomb of St James. You can go in and say a wee prayer. And I was like, I always phase up at this point. I say, look, I go in occasionally. I'm not really faithful through and through in that respect. So I don't think I should hold back. So, and to be fair, two of my mates did as well. Joe, gets a piece of any door. He's straight in. He's down on his knees saying his wee prayer, and he comes out and he's got a wee smile on his face, and I said, don't tell me, just do not say a word, because I'm like, I bet I know what one of his wee thoughts were when he was in there. So anyway, we go to see Vigo that night, and Hartson scores that goal, brilliant turn. We've been clubbed on the way in by the Spanish police, but that was another story. But we come back out, and it's 2-1, we're all celebrating, and you think about it, we're celebrating being in Europe after Christmas for the first time in 20 odd years
since
or something.
1980. Yeah.
And Joe just nudges me. I look at him, and he says, it worked.
Brilliant.
So, great days, and as you say, the difference between Seville and the aftermath of what happened in Manchester, I mean, I think the boys know how to enjoy themselves, and I think that's a tremendous credit to them. And it's a bit like as you move on past the Gordon years and you move on to the Ronnie Delia years and the ground, and you could see this that lifeblood was just a bit, it was lacking, and I thought the Green Brigade. Everybody, and we've talked about Fergus and all this, everybody's got great strengths, and there's some bits you don't agree with. But I think the Green Brigade on the whole has been fabulous for Celtic. Absolutely fabulous. There's a lot of people, I know there's a lot of people that say the politics and all the rest of it, but you know what, we've always been quite a political support, and we don't all agree with one another. But I think you need something, otherwise you just become an anodyne. I've been to a game at Real Madrid. There's no atmosphere. I've been to Bayern Munich. There's no atmosphere.
We need the atmosphere, Paul.
You need something.
We need it. We need it. You know, when you look at the days of the jungle and whatever, and I agree with you. With the Green Brigade as well, they bring that magnetism of the singing and the joyfulness, and they keep all the fans going, don't they?
And the humour's great, you know, and some of the posters.
So, Paul, as a young man, you witnessed the glorious 9 in a row of Celtic. You also seen and witnessed, and under different circumstances, Rangers attaining 9 titles in a row by whatever means they attained them. So we're now in the throes of another historic run. We're sitting at 9 in a row, and during that period it's been down to 3 managers, the fans and loads of other people behind the scenes. So if we run through some of the managerial appointments that we've had, Neil Lennon first time round came in at a time where he was regarded as a rookie, but as a fan he had my backing. How did you feel when Neil took over from Tony Mowbray?
I felt he was on a hiding to nothing actually at the time, because I thought it was very brave of him to take it. I thought he was a bit of a shield initially, because I think after Tony Mowbray had gone so wrong, I thought Peter needed somebody who the support would take, and really Lenny was putting a heck of a lot on the line, because he'd been a great player under Martin. He'd continued on. He'd done a fantastic job for us, and I think he had a lot to lose. I think the pressure he was under, I don't think any of us will ever realise how much pressure he's taken for us. I mean, I used to love seeing him after we'd beaten the Rangers, when he'd take the imaginary cigar to his mouth and face up to the north stand. And I don't know why at the beginning of his managerial I thought, you know, I want to see that day where he's doing the same as manager when we've got 10 in a row. I just had that, I've always had that vision about it, and I hope to goodness it happens. I don't think it'll be easy, but I hope to goodness it happens. But I think Neil had to go through so much. I think he did an excellent job first time round. I think his team helped him. I thought Johan was great, and Alan Thompson. So, you know, I thought it was very good. I could see what the corporate side of Celtic were trying to do. They were trying to provide for succession planning, and they were trying to do all the sort of things that you're told in the corporate world you have to do. So the Ronnie Delia as assistant manager, I think, was pretty clumsy. You could see where the genesis of that came from Man City, and I thought, again, you know, sometimes people speak really well, like Ronnie spoke very well about what he was going to do, and he gets a lot of, he still talks about it, about the diet and various things. I think Celtic looked fitter, or have looked fitter immediately under Brendan, and also under Neil, than they ever did under Ronnie.
Aye, you're probably right on that, Paul.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think as I understand it, I mean, he basically stopped them eating carbohydrates, and they used to run out of puff. You know, you'd see it again and again. After 60 minutes, they were gone. So I think, you know, for him it would have been a big pressure job, because, you know, coming from Norway, I don't think anything would have prepared him for it. I don't think Celtic, to be fair, wanted him to take the top job. So from the highs of Lenny's first time round, you know, he got us through a period which he should be thanked for. But you know, when he left, and when Dermot brought in Brendan Rodgers, you know, no matter how it ended, I don't usually use the term Brendan Rodgers, but
you've done quite well in actually mentioning his name there, Paul.
No, I mean, but to be fair, again, and I think we'll probably all, you know, the way Lenny's now done his second stint, and I was there with Simmy and John Buckley in Tynecastle for Lenny's first game back.
Yes.
And again, it's one of those moments that will live with me when that ball's floated into the box. and Edward gets on the end of it.
Oh, brilliant.
You know, that was old-fashioned football at Celtic, and that
it was
people
magnificent.
going rows down, and, you know, it was brilliant. But, you know, Ronnie did what he had to do. I think he was unfortunate. I think the referees, again, you know, I think it was at Ross County in that match. I think there was a lot of things against him, but his time was up, and Brendan Rodgers, again, that first couple of seasons gave us memories that, you know, and it took us into the 50th anniversary year, and the football that was played then was just superb. You know, I can remember, it's the strangest matches you remember. I remember the match against Thistle away, and the Green Brigade, that I was in the main stand that night, and it was, I think it might have been April, and I think we won 4-0. Paddy Roberts scored a couple of crackers. Yeah. We just played sublime football that night. It was just glorious to watch. And I was sitting looking at the Celtic support opposite, and the Green Brigade had the Silver European Cups out, and the sun was shining on it, and it was just a perfect night. Perfect Celtic football, and just it was just glorious. And it took us into the cup final. And if I'm not mixing my years up, it took us into the Lightning and Rogic, and you know, that again was just one of those moments where you were just astounded.
You know, you touched on it earlier about, you know, the friction, if you like, between Brendan Rodgers and Peter Lawwell. When there's a battle or a clash of personalities, stroke egos, like that at a football club, there is only going to be one winner, isn't there?
Yeah.
And you mentioned there that you felt it was down to Brendan. And was that because his demands weren't being met? Was he looking for a way back into the English league?
Yeah, you only know after the event. To be honest, my initial the way I'd look at it would probably have not been favourable to Peter. I'd have been, you know, back to manager. But then I heard a few things coming out, and I thought, you know, his heart's not in it. You know, no matter how much we sing about it, he's not going to be here for 10. And as soon as you understood that dynamic, then it became pretty clear. And there was also the Dembele thing and the discussion. So things began to seep out about China and about Dembele. And in those kind of situations, huge degree of sympathy for the Celtic board in that case, because they really were getting pelters. And there was nothing they could do about it. And ultimately, you know, that was another Champions League that, you know, we should have got by Athens. We should have got through.
Yeah.
You know, we've lost a lot of money and a lot of, and not money for money's sake, but we've lost a lot of ability to have built even stronger. Because it's been shown that when we pay 5 or 6 million for a player, we get quality. When we pay 2 million, you know, the number of 2 million strikers that we've had, you know, is shocking. You know, when you look at some of the quality over the last 10 years. But, you know, by the by, when we pay good money, or we unearth, you know, somebody that we can get who's a youth player in England or whatever, and we can pay them more or pay them in a different way. By a different way, I mean, we're not paying it out in the transfer fee, we're giving them something direct, then, you know, it works for us. So, you know, look, Brendan was, some of the football was great. By the third season, I thought that it was becoming possession for possession's sake, and it wasn't.
Wouldn't disagree with that, aye?
And again, to be fair, I think when Neil took over, I thought it was great. I thought, this is fantastic. This is just what we need. I was disappointed in the end of that season. I thought we were just playing the same way, and I couldn't see what he was bringing. And actually, I was one of the ones that was pretty down after we won the cup final and he got appointed. Simmy was saying to me, he was winding me up, saying, this is fantastic, this will be great, Neil's going to do it, and I just couldn't see it myself.
But I meant it, Paul. And I mean, that cup final, me and you've been to many games, right? Early years, and been involved in lots of different football aspects, and I know we're going to come on to the Lisbon Lions and whatever, which we're very fortunate to be involved in. But you and I have been to home away games. We've sat together in various parts of the stadium, including within the directors box as well, and met various different dignitaries at games, rock stars, pop stars, whatever you want to call them. But I would like to take us back to that cup final where we're sitting, yourself, me, Johnny Gilmer, Joe, who's a lovely old gentleman, Johnny Buckley and his family and whatever, and Wally comes in as well, comes up to the table, stoning round about us, talking away, taking the time, as he did in Seville, as he does with Celtic supporters. A great Celtic man, which obviously we would like to talk about that as well. But that cup final, Paul, was so special. It was the most, and I think we had the discussion with John Gilmer, Paul John, that it was intense, but it was magnificent to win it. And I've got to be honest, when Neil was announced the manager, I was so delighted. I was so delighted that here, a lot of people may say no, but Neil all of a sudden became the underdog. No, he's not the right guy, he's not this. But we've been the underdogs for years, and it was great to support him. And I actually admire the way that he's went about now taking the Celtic job, the way he's been playing. He's free-flowing, he's brought it back as well. He's introduced free-flowing attacking football. It's been great, and he's learnt a lot as well. Even within his coaching, and his coaching staff behind him have been good to change it into a defensive game to an attacking game, sitting in, maybe we might sit in for 30 minutes, maybe attack for 30 minutes or whatever. I think Neil's grown up and he's become more educated as well in how to handle himself. I'm proud of Neil Lennon, the job that he has done for us, the Celtic support, Paul John and Paul.
I agree with you, and I remember the walk back from Hampden. I was going to the Beechwood after it, and the news broke, and largely people were disappointed. To be honest with you, I'm again looking at Neil Lennon, and I kind of thought he was just seeing that season out, Paul, you know, because he couldn't make massive wholesale changes. One thing he did do is he benched the loan players, you know, because he knew they wouldn't be there next season. So he was forward planning, and it gave me a vibe that he was going to be there, you know, because he was benching these players. But he's obviously gone on. Last season was a different kettle of fish entirely, Paul. And Jim mentioned the dearly departed Lisbon Lions that we celebrate. And we should always celebrate them, but we also enjoyed the 50th anniversary of the Lisbon victory. That
for me, Paul, was just, I thought that week, the lead up to it, the week couldn't have been more perfect. I remember the day of the event at the Hydro, first of all seeing, I assume it was a Green Brigade putting the Caesar posters around Glasgow, was just... It was humorous.
It's been intimated, Paul. It's been intimated it was them. It wasn't actually them, but it's been intimated. It's been intimated.
But, you know, it was humorous and it was fantastic. And it was, you know, again, a glorious sunny day. And I can remember being down in, I dipped down to Finnieston to meet up with a few folk before we went down to the Hydro. And it was one of those days where Glasgow was just green and white. There was nothing else. It was just and it wasn't a triumphalist way. It was just a beautiful day. And then going down to the Hydro, and sometimes I know we're all as Celtic supporters, we've always got something to say, not least of all myself. But the quality of that event was just fabulous. You know, it just. You know, apart from, I think I nipped out when the Bay City Rollers were on.
Oh, you did you?
But it was. I thought it was a great night. And again, I was with a number of people, different age groups, who followed Celtic for 60 years or 20 years or something like that. And you just thought, you know, this is what it's about. It's about all the people you meet who go over the long term and who stick by it when it ain't great, but who really enjoy it. So, you know. It was great. I was there again with Joe that night and Fat Bob from Kerrydale, and so that was a lovely night. And I just thought, you know, again, I think I was down the following week. I got an invite from Willie to head down to London, and there was the London event, and that was I think it was a Hyde Park Hotel. It was a stunning event, and the mix again, and it was that mix of our supporters clubs down there. So you had all the supporters clubs from London, huge Irish contingent, just a fantastic sing-song. You had the Billionaires as well, they were all there, but it was just that, everybody's a Celtic supporter. We had Simple Minds on, it was just a brilliant night.
It's a good mixture, but when you look at Paul John and Paul, the Lisbon Lions, and you look at the lead up to that 50th anniversary, it was so special. But again, we touch on, we look at the Lisbon Lions, we look at what they've done for the culture, for the history of Scotland, and what they've done for the Celtic heritage, most importantly. Now, you look at the club, and could they do more for the Lisbon Lions? Could they have done more? Now, without Willie Hockey, the Lisbon Lions would not have got to the 50th anniversary without him, because he was instrumental. And I've said this to Paul John before. He was instrumental and is instrumental in helping keep those guys alive and keeping them together and helping in various ways, Paul.
Yeah.
Now, you and I know that at first hand. And obviously we've shared many a game with Willie as well. We've shared many discussions with Willie. We've had great memories with him. We've got great memories to still go through with him together. So it's so important. But a Celtic man through and through. And again, I don't know anybody in all my life that's had so much love for the Lisbon Lions.
Sure.
As him.
And I think that's something that I think everybody sees it now, but I think it takes a special person to have seen it back in the mid-80s. The
25th anniversary, and leading up to it when he was a young man then.
And so this is absolutely fundamental to who Celtic are.
Sorry, I'm not saying Willie's old. I'm saying when he was younger back then, just in case. But
no, but I think
he had a vision back then. He was a young man, and I loved him.
It's having a vision that this is fundamental to Celtic. Is that this young team of all from from a very short distance of Celtic Park, other than the outlier Bobby Lennox, but. He saw that actually was going to be the foundation of how of what Celtic is. That's sustained us through the 20 years when we weren't in Europe after Christmas. But it also is the foundation for everything else thereafter. It's the ethos of Celtic, and certain characters in that team still, if you spend 5 minutes in Bertie Ault's presence,
you're in the presence of a legend.
You're in the presence of a legend, but it's back to that. Could go anywhere, could stand anywhere, could be in the Bernabeu, or could be at Ibrox. Nobody's getting past. Bobby Murdoch, the rest of them, just fabulous. Jinky, somebody who is at Hento, and the rest are calling across.
Yeah.
For the photo at the end of a match, because they know the quality of this, and I think. Even during lockdown, I've been sitting thinking about it going, hang on a second, these are guys from all the primary schools around Glasgow that are actually top of the world.
You're right, and the photograph, you make me think of that as well. So that was Hento, Santa Maria, Puskas and Di Stefano that actually asked them over, you belong with us, wee man. Come on, we'll get the photographs taken. Now, I remember being with Willie, which I was, various places we would go and go to the football and whatever. But I always remember one time we were in the Cardinal, where we were going to Cannes, and we're talking about the Lisbon Lions. And he says, do you know what the Lisbon Lions are? I says, heroes. He says, but I've got to tell you this, Sammy, they're the Pied Pipers. And I said, that's a magnificent saying. Never told him that. I said it to myself. But I said, that's quite good, Willie. That's quite the Pied Pipers. And he's right, because they are the Pied Pipers. Because what they've done, everything follows on.
Exactly. Yeah.
It follows on and it flows on. So you look at the man there with the mindset and the vision to say it's important to keep them together and keep it going about the Lisbon Lions. So who is going to take up the mantle for the next 10 years, for the next 15 years, Paul John? the next 25 years. I think that's going to be quite interesting, how we go forward with our heroes. You look at Bertie and you look at other players that come to the lounge, that come round and they talk and the party. Who's going to do that, Paul, in 10 years' time? And
I think
who is it?
I think the interesting things, I mean, no answering that question, but the point before about the Pied Piper is, I was speaking to Paul just before the podcast. I was saying that, you know, I've got friends in Austria and Germany who were introduced to Celtic off the back of their fathers watching Celtic play in the 60s.
Absolutely, aye.
And they said, that's the team to follow. Now, I'm sure there will be people across Europe who may follow Ajax because of what they did, but it'll be Ajax or Celtic. You know, Bayern Munich were quite, you know, they weren't a flair team. And none of the other European Cup winners, Forest and all the rest of it, tremendous. Celtic and Ajax, and Celtic for these Austrian and German boys. You know, and I've got a good mate in Salzburg who puts us all up when we're playing in Austria or Germany, Klause, who I think you've met.
I've met him, aye.
And there's a team there who naturally would support San Pauli, would support Stuttgart, are in an area where people support Bayern Munich. There's Croatians as well who would support Croatia Zagreb. There's Klause who could choose if he wanted, and certainly wouldn't, to support Rapid Vienna.
Aye.
But, you know, they all come together and they travel everywhere for 10, 15, in Klause's case, over 20 years, coming back and forward to Glasgow and travelling all over Europe because of that Pied Piper effect of the Lions and the quality of people like Caesar, your Davy Hayes, your Neil Lennons, your Martin O'Neills, and now I've got heroes like Scott Brown, people who are just stand up for Celtic.
Aye, and that's what we're saying. I mean, we're all Celtic guys in the room here, and the people who are listening, and it's fantastic as well, Paul John, that we've escalated from round about the mid 10, 15,000s that we're up to today. We're 120,000 listeners coming in now, and that's because of the vision as well, to bring the Celtic supporter in, the Celtic player in, the Celtic dignitary in, the Celtic ambassadors in, ex-Celtic players, ex-Celtic managers, whatever it may be, because just like we all are, we're all inclusive and we're all together. And that's what I've always found a strength in Willie Hockey, that he's a Celtic guy, he's a football guy. Willie's the type of guy where I would like to see being involved in football, which he is at the moment, but more involved in the think tank of youth and helping youth even more, because when you talk to him, he has got a good insight and knowledge of football and how it should be played. And maybe that's embedded into him for his Lisbon Lion days. And it still sticks with him and how he sees things and his vision going forward. So I can't praise him any higher than with the Lisbon Lions, and there's a lot of good fond memories with him as well, in talking about football and other various things. But
I think also
brilliant.
It's you only start appreciating all of that, especially during this pandemic.
Absolutely. When
you start to look at what's important in your life. And when I was looking at my first game was nearly 50 years ago.
Aye.
I don't think I'm that old, but obviously I am.
Yeah,
and
Paul.
It's just like...
Paul, I don't know if you know, but you've not got that flick anymore in the Charlie Nicholas.
I still don't wear the socks,
you know what I mean?
Abby, and I still push up the jacket. So, but it's just... But it's the joy that you've had over the years. If you can think of anything that's given you more joy than Celtic over the years... And I know everybody will sit and go, oh, my kids, my mum, my family and all the rest of it. And there's joy there. It's a different type of joy. Best joy in the world, Celtic.
Paul, Celtic is so special. Paul John, I don't know if I've told you this before, but Celtic is so special. It's great. And Paul, you're igniting in my memory things that I'd forgotten. Again, I think this is happening every week to me, Paul John. That different people are igniting things into me. And
but you know, it's like sitting listening to is it Stevie from St Rock, and it's phenomenal when you see, and it's that whole thing about social responsibility,
absolutely,
consciousness, bring it all together. Football's just a vehicle, and it's that everybody else comes on board.
Absolutely, Paul. Big man, I took you up to the St. Rochs as well, didn't I?
Aye.
And you loved it, you went, wow. But obviously you were for the posh end of the town. And then you come back into St. Rochs and you went, this is
dig,
brilliant.
It's another dig. Family from Mayo, Gorbals, Eastwood. You know, what am I meant to do?
Listen, you know I love you, and I'm not going to ask you your marital status at this particular time.
Jim, you're absolutely right. In the last couple of months, we've had 250,000 listens on A Celtic State of Mind, and that's all down to the fans, and it's all down to the guests who come along.
Absolutely.
And what Jim and I would like to say to you, Paul, is a massive thank you for coming along and joining us today on A Celtic State of Mind.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Paul.